To start things off, we have a fantastic plenary address, which is from Dr. Carlos Corvalán, who is the Senior Advisor in Risk Assessment and Global Environmental Change for the Pan American Health Organization and the World Health Organization. Carlos will be presenting on a global perspective on the interface between climate change and population aging. Just to give you some background on Carlos, Dr. Carlos Corvalán is a senior advisor on risk assessment and global environmental change at the Pan American Health Organization and the World Health Organization, based in Washington, D.C. Carlos joined the WHO in 1993 and the Pan American Health Organization in 2008. He's editor and author of the WHO book Decision Making in Environmental Health: From Evidence to Action, and the WHO report Climate Change and Human Health: Risks and Responses, and of the WHO report Ecosystems and Human Well-Being: Health Synthesis, which was the WHO's contribution to the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. He's also co-authored the report on preventing diseases through healthy environments, which provides a detailed assessment of the environment burden of disease globally, by region and by country. For many years, Carlos has been giving workshops to representatives from ministries of health and other government officials and experts to promote awareness and action related to protecting health from climate and other environmental changes. Carlos has a master's degree in public health from Sydney University, Australia, and a PhD in environment health from Nijmegen University in the Netherlands. Can I welcome Carlos Corvalán?
Thank you very much. Let me very quickly find the presentation. There we are. Well, first of all, let me tell you how pleased I am to be here, how thrilled I was to receive this invitation, and also to say how visionary the organizers are, not for having invited me, but for having chosen this topic. This is such an important topic, and I honestly believe that not a lot has been done, and it takes a country like Canada to come up with an idea like this, and good for some of Fraser University to do this. So I'm going to be talking about, give you an overview of the issue of global climate change and health, with a focus on the aging population. And first of all, I want to tell you very briefly that in 2008, WHO declared, we have a World Health Day every year, and there's something of public health importance. So World Health Day 2008 was climate change. And that was something very special that WHO recognized in 2008, how important climate change is for global health. And what I'm showing you this is because this was the logo that we developed. And the logo is the Pachamama, Mother Earth, protecting the Earth. And you can see this, which was later done by some Brazilian artists as an embroidery. I'll show you the full thing at the end. But basically what we have here is Pachamama protecting her children. And Pachamama is a woman, is an old lady, is a grandmother or a great-great-grandmother looking after us. And I truly believe that we're not doing a very good job ourselves at looking after our Pachamama. So let me give you a little bit of a context. I'm going to start very, very big before we zoom into our problem. And I think the first thing I want you to hear about, briefly, is about the Earth Summit and Sustainable Development that occurred in 1992 where sustainable development was defined as development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And it rests in three pillars: a social, an economic, and an environmental pillar. And health is somehow hidden inside the social pillar. And also to remind you that in 1992, the conventions for climate change and biodiversity were signed, and 1 year later, the one on desertification. So it was a very important moment. The importance of it today is that we, international agencies, are already starting to work towards Rio Plus 20. So 20 years after the Earth Summit is going to be celebrated in June next year in Rio de Janeiro. Another important aspect of that 92 conference was the Rio Declaration, the Agenda 21, which was an agenda for action for all the countries, and the principles. And Principle 1 said that human beings are at the center of concerns for sustainable development. They are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. When we take this to the work that I do, environmental health, we are concerned, obviously, about health. That's why I put health in the middle. But we have the environment as a whole around it. And very often we've been working on environmental problems. And perhaps the most traditional way that you've been hearing about environmental health is that we have a problem of chemicals and we worry about health. Or we have a problem of water and sanitation and we worry about health, air pollution and health. And this is correct, but the environment is much broader than this. So very often we also need to be concerned about the causes of the causes. What is causing chemicals? What is causing air pollution? What is causing the problems of water and sanitation? So we call this the causes of the causes. And then we're concerned from a health perspective because any one of these that you take will give you a range of diseases. So we're not talking about one problem gives you one disease, but very often one problem will give you multiple health outcomes. So the environment is a complex thing to tackle, to understand, and this is perhaps just a simplification of what we're talking about. It was mentioned in the introduction about a work that we did in WHO on the burden of disease. And what we did was to try to estimate how much disease is attributed to the environment, or better still, how much disease could we avoid if we had the best possible environment in all settings around the world. And then when you do this burden of disease analysis and you plot it against income, you find this very amazing situation that unfortunately very poor countries do very badly in protecting their people from environmental hazards. And wealthier countries, they do somewhat better, some of them a lot better. But it's not just income. There are some things that some countries do that allows them to be not very wealthy, but to have a low environmental burden of disease. If you're curious to know where Canada is, that's that point over there. Mind you that this data was used with mortality morbidity data of 2004. Therefore, the GNI is also 2004. I'm sure Canada's is now much higher today. When we zoom into some of these countries, just to look at one set of countries, those below a certain burden of disease, we find that even in this small, apparently equal distribution, there are important differences. Countries here are weighted by the population size. So again, you have Canada over there. And we seem to have a cluster of countries, wealthier countries, that have a low environmental burden of disease, and some fast evolving economies which are doing somewhat better as a cluster, and a few others that are not doing so well. But African countries that we saw before, they are way out of this graphic. And here we get a little bit on the topic of today, which is what is happening with the population dynamics. I took this data from one international organization on life expectancy at birth, and trying to compare 1980 to roughly today, 2010, and look at the countries that have put more than 15 years. They have increased more than 15 years in their life expectancy in these 30 years. And you have countries like Cambodia, which put 22 years. And you can see there, these are all developing countries. It's all developing countries that are managing to turn the curve in infant mortality, because this is life expectancy is very much a reflection of infant mortality, and increase by 27 years, by 22 years, by 15 years in the case of Nicaragua, etc. I put there China and India, two very large, important countries. They have also increased, but not as much, because their baseline was already higher. And countries like Japan and Canada, which have also increased, but their baseline was definitely a lot higher. But still, Canada was able to move from 75 to 81. That's nearly 6 years increase in these 30 years. And if we look at a population distribution, and you can also see the population size here, the world in 1980, in 2010, and in 2050, you see an increase in population, 4.4 billion, 7 billion, 9 billion. And what is important to show you here is the distribution of people over 65. And you can see how this proportion gets larger globally. And here are some examples of regions: Africa, Asia, and Western Europe. I put Western Europe there as one example of a region that has a very large fraction of the population over 65 today, and it's going to increase a little bit more. But this is more or less what we expect the world to be way beyond 2050. So a definite increase in population over 60 or over 65. If we look at the growth of population in percentage, age over 65 between 1950 and 2050, what we see is that in the last 50 years there has been some humble increase in the proportion of people. Here you have the colors and the countries. Definitely Japan, Europe, Canada appears as a very large proportion, as we heard today, that it was roughly 25%. I wasn't sure whether it was Canada or was the region that when it said 25%. Anybody? Can someone correct me? Was 25% the population age 65 and over in this region or in whole of Canada? In Canada. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what we have for the future is definitely an increase in some countries. So we're reaching a plateau in some countries like Canada, in Europe, but Japan is still managing to have a very huge population age over 65. So the world will have to absorb and be able to change in a way that is appropriate for an aging population. If we look at this cut down by regions of the world, and again 2010, 2050, and 2100, we see that Asia definitely, by size of the population of the continent, has the highest proportion. But what is very interesting is that regions like Africa, which today have a low number of a low fraction of people that are over 65, is going to be second in 2100. So the world itself is changing. The dynamics of the world changing. Now note that this is in population size. We're not talking about fraction. The fraction of the population Africa would still be rather small. Now, what is happening and what will happen to the population in the world? So if we look at Western Europe, the population in Western Europe of age 65 plus, we will increase a further 62% in that part of the world. But if you look at the population globally, over 65, we have an increase of 273%. That means that from today, or roughly from 2000 to 2050, we're going to add 1.1 billion people over 65 to the world. Another important phenomenon, the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. So we are at this crossing point. You heard a lot in the news last year or the year before last when people were saying, we have crossed that 50%. The world is 50% urban. This is here. So we have a rural population in decline, but the urban population is fast growing. And that has implications as well, positive and negative. So we need to consider those. So when we get now into the climate change challenge, you probably have seen this picture, at least some of you have, from IPCC, where if you look at the socio-economic development, the way we run our economy, our production and consumption patterns, this has an implication on greenhouse gas emissions, on climate drivers, which precipitate climate change and would have an impact on, well, many things. We'll have an impact on ecosystems, on water resources, food security, settlements, society, human health. Now, why it is this of particular concern to us is because even if you don't worry about climate change, you do worry that ecosystems have an implication on human health, water resources, food security, etc. So we are having a whole system that on its own impacts on health, which is being driven by a larger process which is impacting on these drivers. And not only this, but each one of these on their own, socioeconomic development has an impact on health. Air contaminants have an impact on health. And of course, climate change has also a direct impact on human health. A very complex but very worrisome situation. If we see it from the point of view of the earlier scheme that I showed you, we have climate change as one risk factor among many. But what makes climate change such a special risk factor? Why are we highlighting climate change? Because climate change will impact directly on health, but climate change will also have an impact on other risk factors for health, whether through migration, through transport, through desertification, through water scarcity, through changes in water and sanitation, on vectors, you name it. Now, this is to highlight that at global level, we have these conventions that look after climate change, after biodiversity, after desertification, but there's still a lot of work to do. And perhaps one of the biggest problems in the future, other than these three, is going to be, or is already is in many countries, the issue of water scarcity. Now, a lot of work has been done to study and to define the problems. You can see it, and I'm going to show you a very quick series of graphics. Human health from the point of view of different global drivers. Human health from the point of view of a causal chain proposing actions at every level of this chain. Climate change from IPCC as a description of direct, indirect exposures, but mediated by social conditions, social factors. Climate change varying according to temperature and the impact of this variation on health. Climate change, or studied from the point of view of one driver and one health outcome. A causative chain, again, showing the direction from climate change to health impact through going through modulating influences, changes, things that change, the mitigation that we do, the adaptation that we don't do. IPCC again, putting some degree of magnitude for the health impacts. And if we stop here for a little while, when we think of aging population, we worry about things like number of people suffering from death, disease, and injuries from extreme weather events. We worry about increases in the frequency of cardiorespiratory diseases from changes in air quality. But very little do we know about increasing malnutrition. We think malnutrition is a problem for children. Is it possible that it's a problem for aged population in some places? When we think of disease vectors or malaria, again, we worry often about children, but not necessarily about older adults, etc. Perhaps some very interesting work that has been done, or this is not the best picture, but let me show you the next one, is to show how countries are affected differently, the regions of the world, by climate change. So we're not talking about the magnitude of the different diseases, but by putting them together, and we see that we have vulnerabilities in some places. And a very unequal world, as you can see, where Africa and parts of Asia and parts of Latin America are much, or Caribbean, a lot worse off than places in like Europe and North America. We will probably discuss today a lot about vulnerabilities. This is a difficult term because one cannot say that people are vulnerable, that this set of people are vulnerable. People are in a state of vulnerability, and we are all in different states of vulnerability at different times of the year, of the day, etc. But people are more often on a steady state of vulnerability to climate change. And these are some of the groups that you can say are in state of vulnerability. Definitely children, and perhaps the most work we've done on climate change is to look at children. A lot of people talk about the impacts on the poor, indigenous population, of course, pregnant women, disabled people, and the aged. And the aged is the one that has an intersection with many other groups that are also vulnerable. So specifically about aging population, we're concerned about things like their immune system decline, their diminished physical mobility, in the case of disasters. They are more likely to already be experiencing poor health, which makes things difficult. More likely to have reduced social contact. Social isolation is a very serious problem related to health. Diminished ability to regulate body temperature. I think our Pachamama is suffering from this at the moment. Reduced income leading to a reduced quality of life. And, as we said before, it is a growing segment, a growing proportion of the world population. A lot is being said today about non-communicable diseases. There's going to be a very important UN summit, a global summit, and that's a lot of preparation. WHO recently came out with a report in preparation for the summit in New York. And in case you cannot read there, let me read this important quote. It says, "The epidemic of these diseases, non-communicable diseases, is being driven by powerful forces now touching every region of the world." And this is the first important statement, because in the past people were saying, well, NCDs are really a problem of wealthier countries. It's not a problem of wealthy countries. NCDs is also a problem of poor countries. And the driving forces are demographic aging, rapid unplanned urbanization, and the globalization of unhealthy lifestyles. Now, the biggest worry today is that chronic conditions normally develop slowly, but we're seeing a very fast increase. So developing countries are moving fast to an epidemic of non-communicable diseases, very quickly happening this epidemiological transition. The report looked at 4 main risk factors: unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, tobacco use, and harmful use of alcohol, leading to 4 key NCDs: cardiovascular disease, cancers, diabetes, chronic and respiratory diseases. But what is of importance in these graphics to show how this is a cycle of poverty. So the poverty at the household level leading to diseases, leading to limited access to health services, leading to high costs of health care, leading to the vicious circle. Now, and this is some important statistics for you, 57 million deaths in 2008, that's the target year when the data for this report was taken. 36 million, or 63%, were due to non-communicable diseases. And 80% are occurring in low and middle income countries. And 3/4 take place in people 60 and over. So not a lot of studies have been done on climate change and non-communicable diseases. There's one study by Sharon Friel and colleagues, and they looked at a range of climate-driven problems, like the frequency and intensity of heat extremes, and how through heat stress or increase in air pollution can lead to cardiovascular disease or respiratory disease. The same with changes in temperature and rainfall, also with air pollution or airborne pollen leading to respiratory diseases, or extreme weather events leading to injuries, or indirectly also extreme weather events leading through problems such as the problem of nutrition insecurity, to general poor health, trauma, or impaired livelihood leading to mental health, migration of population, people that had to migrate to live a place. We know there's a lot of evidence of their mental health suffering. You've seen this before, I'm sure. This is showing you the temperature in summer 2003 and the potential increase, first observed temperatures and increase in temperature towards 2100. And if you remember that roughly 70,000 people died of that unprecedented, totally unprecedented heat wave in 2003 in Europe. Now, that temperature is not out of the ordinary around 2050. If this graphic is, if this projection is correct. Very worrisome. Now, it is also worrisome because, as we said before, and this is just taking the population of Western Europe, there's a huge population increase here. So what are we having in the future? We're having warmer days and warmer nights, with a much larger fraction of the population exposed, just by population increase in that age group. If you think about the growth in urbanization that we were talking before, we will be adding between today and 2050 2.9 billion people to cities. If we stay on the topic of heat waves, you know the heat island effect makes cities a lot warmer than the surrounding countryside. So are we thinking how we're building, how we're going to accommodate nearly 3 billion people in the next 40 years in the world to make sure that beside everything else we need to worry about when building a city, also that risk factors like climate change won't make matters worse for anyone. This also comes from IPCC, and you look at this range, everybody talks about a 1.8 to 4 degrees increase in temperature to 2100. So this is the predictions of the models. No? However, definitely we would hope that we would stay around there, but the reality is showing that the temperature is likely to go a lot higher. But what I find most fascinating is this yellow-orange line, which basically says if we were able to stop everything today, this is the inertia of temperature. So we cannot slow the temperature of the world immediately. There is going to be a huge inertia no matter what we do. So obviously what we want is a scenario like this where things start to come down a little bit later in the future. So this is the scenario that we have today, these interacting dynamics that I've been telling you about, a growth of population over 65, an increase in temperature towards 2100, and an increase in urban population globally, all happening, interacting at the same time. And together with this, if we go back to the 3 pillars of sustainable development, social, economic, and environmental, what we have had really are social, economic, and environmental global crises. We have an ongoing crisis of poverty. We have had a crisis of food. You remember the food crisis about 2-3 years ago? We're likely to be entering into a new food crisis or the continuation of the same. This problem has not been solved. An ongoing problems of inequalities. We had a huge financial crisis that we haven't really recovered very well. An ongoing energy crisis, plus the environmental crisis that comes through climate change or degraded, depleted ecosystems. And all this interacting with the social dynamics, with the social problems we've been discussing. This comes from the World Meteorological Organization, and I find it really fascinating to look at this timeline. And let me go through this very quickly. 2003, hottest summer in Europe since 1540. 40 to 70,000 deaths. 2004, first tropical cyclone detected in the southern hemisphere. 2005, one of the 2 top warmest years. The other one was 98. The deadliest hurricane was Katrina in the US since 1928. In 2006, worst wildfire season on record in the US. 2007, Mexico flood declared the worst weather-related disaster in the history of the country. 2008 in China, the worst severe winter weather in 5 decades. 2009, heat waves again in Australia. highest temperature ever recorded so far south in the world was in Victoria, a temperature of nearly 50 degrees centigrade. 2010, again, warmest year on record, together with 98 and 2005. Pakistan, you remember, the worst floods in history. And at the same time, we had the warmest months in Moscow, followed by forest fires. Let me make a parenthesis here to tell you that although this is here, many meteorologists, they would tell you that this has nothing to do with climate change. Nobody's arguing about the others, but these two, they were exceptional meteorological circumstances. Okay, we're not experts in that topic, but it's possible. And again, in 2010, high temperatures that broke historical extremes in China, most devastating flood in the country's history in one of the provinces. If you look at the papers today, 2011, just in the US, you hear about tremendous floods, killer tornadoes, etc. So, although most people that work in the climate experts, they would tell you that it is impossible to say that any one of these events is a sign or a consequence of climate change. What you will hear is that it's consistent with what is expected from climate change. So there's going to be a time when we say, well, we have the sufficient evidence to say all this is not only consistent, it is climate change. But that part is missing. So I know my time is running out, so we're moving into another section. It's fine. Very briefly, what are we going to do about it? What are we already now doing about it? An agenda for action. And I think that it's important for you to know what WHO is proposing. WHO is proposing a global work plan. It was reviewed by the executive board in 2009 and accepted. So this is sort of activities that will start to address the implications of climate change for health and health systems. So it has these 4 areas of work: evidence, awareness raising, partnerships, and the strengthening of health systems. When we talk about evidence, I think that it's true that you always need more evidence and more studies to determine what diseases are being affected by climate change. What we're not saying is that we need more evidence to act. That is the wrong message. We need more evidence to know how we can do things better. So we need more evidence on which interventions work. And a lot of work is missing in that area. So if you think of this conference and you think of Canada, and if someone is proposing, for example, a heat wave warning system, which we know they work really well in Europe, after the 2003 heat wave, they were introduced in countries. You have them in Canada, etc. Do they work in Latin America? Would it work in Africa or in Asia? So what is missing when we have that type of evidence, the evidence of the interventions that function? How we translate an intervention that was tested and proved and functioning well to another country? Not easy at all. When we hear presentation during these 2 days, I'm sure, and I hope we will hear about a heat wave warning system and what is done to protect, in particularly, senior citizens who are the most vulnerable in this case. But those interventions may not necessarily work in poorer countries. And we need to find ways to have interventions that are universal or that are also easily translated, or more work to help countries to adapt these interventions. Raising awareness. And again, I think the organizers of this conference are doing a fantastic job at raising the awareness on one topic, on aging populations, but very important. We need to do a lot more awareness raising in everything. But most importantly, let me tell you, because I do this, a lot of awareness raising and education within the health sector in countries. We are one of the sectors that is the least involved, the least informed about climate change, unfortunately. The problem is too big for any one sector, any one ministry, any one country to work at it alone. This is something that is done all together, partnerships, not just UN, with NGOs, with private sector, governments, the people themselves, the people that are involved in the problem and in the solution of the problem. So these partnerships that need to be built. And for us, of course, the importance is to strengthen health systems. Climate change, as we said, is happening, will continue to occur. Health systems will need to adapt. Also, health systems will need to contribute to mitigation. We cannot say, well, we are just victims here. No, the health system has a role to also reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. But mostly it will have to do a very good job at adaptation. I hope some of you have seen this. This comes from WHO, from the network of age-friendly cities, and it's a way to... there were topics that were looked at. What were the biggest concern for an age-friendly city? What would you want in there? And you want things like proper transport, housing, social participation, outdoor spaces, community support, communication, employment, etc. What I try to do here is to help us think, and this needs to be developed further, and I know that this conference is giving us some input into this. What is it that we need to do from a climate change lens, from an age-friendly city? We definitely need things like safe, walkable, accessible green spaces where elderly people feel secure to walk. But I'm thinking globally, I'm not thinking Canada. But try to put yourself in the picture of having this in some developing country where an older person will not necessarily go out in the evening because of fear of being robbed, mugged, whatever. Or you may not have these accessible green spaces, or you may not have accessible roads to get to that places, even if it's a safe environment. It may not be a physically safe environment to walk. We definitely need green public and active transport where people can also do a bit of exercise, walk, more friendly to walk. Energy efficient housing. When we talk about these social issues, we need to integrate people to participate in climate change group. I read in one of the abstracts about seniors or elders as agents for change. I think that's really very nice, very important. But people need to be empowered. Some people are empowered, others are not. People need to be empowered. The enormous work that can be done as volunteers or as participants in network. And when we talk about community support and information and health services, well, we need to also help promote these green healthcare facilities. We need more education for our senior citizens about climate change and to other people about the needs of senior citizens. And something that I'm really interested about is technology, savoir-faire, or to be active in social networks. And I'll just give you a personal example here. My mother is 88 and my father is 92. They live in Australia. we communicate regularly through Skype. And they do everything through the internet. They read their newspapers from Chile in the internet, etc. But I've never managed to get them into Facebook. You know that when you look at the statistics about Facebook or other social networks, the age groups, it goes like this. You have children, it goes up, and then elderly people, they don't get in there. But when you look at the growth, the segment that is growing the fastest is the segment over 55. So something is happening there. But so we need to change a little bit the technology to make it more friendly. It's not a friendly technology. It's a bit invasive also. But we're getting there. And look how important it is that for the social cohesion to keep people communicated, informed, etc. We also need to take this framework of WHO and make it relevant for the topic at hand. We definitely do not have a lot of evidence, a lot of work on the needs of the aging population and climate change. We need to do a lot more work on raising awareness outside Canada, where you're already getting there. We need more development and new forms of partnerships, and definitely strengthen health system to start thinking of that particular segment of the population when they think of health and climate change. Now, to finalize, this is how we also need to look at the broader picture of sustainable development, integrate, because these three pillars are not separated, they are one. But I strongly believe that health is at the heart of sustainable development. Health has an implication and is affected by the social environment, by the economic environment, and by the physical environment. I leave you with the full tapestry of the Pachamama. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for that interesting and inspiring introductory speech. We have some time for questions and from the floor to Carlos. Yep, we have. Could you tell me? Could you say your name and where you're from when you're asking questions, please?
Hi, Tim DeCaro from Vancouver. That was quite an exciting presentation. I was really glad that you mentioned interventions and the need to test them. I was curious about WHO and PAHO's agenda with regards to intervention. You mentioned the heat warning systems, but are there other areas of intervention that are particularly of interest to WHO and PAHO?
Yeah, well, thanks also for the opportunity to mention something that I didn't get into, and is that what we're doing now in PAHO and WHO is to work with countries to make assessment of the vulnerability of their populations to climate change. We really need to know in every specific setting who is vulnerable to what and where. When we think of climate change, and as I said at the beginning, because of the health implications are so varied. You have from injuries from a flood, through malaria, through heat waves. They're all very different interventions. So the first step is to understand what are the vulnerabilities and to identify them very well. And then the second step is to come up with what we call the adaptation options for the health sector. What should the health sector do? And what we are seeing is that although a lot of work has been done in things like heat waves, that's relatively easy. But it's relatively easy in some countries. In other countries, it's rather difficult. The physical determination of when a heat wave is going to arrive It's the same whether you do it in Canada or you do it somewhere in Africa. What is different is what you do about it. And because that is has to be relevant to the society, it's a cultural situation, it has to do with the availability of a proper response. So, for example, in a place like Canada or Europe, the recommendations are very clear, and I've seen these fantastic recommendations that things to do, how to maintain yourself hydrated, how to take cold showers, how to go to a place that has air conditioning if you don't have one. None of these things exist in some countries. So these interventions will need to vary tremendously from place to place. So there isn't a direct answer on what is working. I think heat waves are working, and perhaps disaster planning has also been working. We have a lot of experience with disaster planning, even though very often they overwhelm us. They overwhelm even very wealthy countries. So this is the current situation, but we are advancing in that direction. First, understanding the vulnerabilities, moving into how do we respond to each of these vulnerabilities from a point of view of an intervention.
Thank you very much. My name is Gerontology, and I am from Athens, Greece. I came here because, of course, this subject strikes us a lot and widely. I did see my country in the change of climate in 2007. We had also very rapid change of climate and very hot and very high temperatures in 2007. But before that, the first completely unusual change of climate in not only my country but also in southern Mediterranean, Spain, Portugal and Greece, we had in 1987, where the temperatures suddenly in summer dropped to 47 Celsius, of course, 47 degrees. So we till today we don't know exactly. We also, the simplistic answer is that on account of deforestation, because during the summer we have very burnings in forests. So, but it's not scientifically proven that perhaps which is the cause. The cause is the climate brings the deforestation, the burning of forests, or the burning of forests causes the up of the increase of climate. So we have to search about it and make scientific research about it, because it's not completely clear and easily understood and answered.
Yeah, I think that you bring an important topic at hand. Is that when we think of climate change, we're thinking about one global environmental problem. It's not the only one. And what we are really doing to Pachamama here is a multiple set of problems: deforestation, degradation of ecosystems in general, extraction of water more than faster than it can be replenished. So there's a multiple set of problems, and I don't think that we can disentangle them very well. So when we can understand them at the global level, but when it comes to one specific place, what caused it? Is it the increasing climate, or was it the deforestation, or was it something else? Personally, I believe that climate change is happening, and the observed increase in temperature, which is very small now, is still sufficient to be causing the problems that we are observing. And I should tell you that I was in Greece on holidays in 2007. I saw the forest fires, and I've never been in a city so hot in the middle of the night. We went out for dinner at 11 o'clock at night because it was so hot in the hotel, and it was hotter in the street. And there you have the heat island effect very clearly. It's all cement. It's a very, very hot city. Okay.
I'm Simon Evans. I'm a researcher from the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I was particularly taken by your suggestion of looking at the age-friendly cities framework, through a climate change lens. That seems to me a very tangible and sensible way forward. I wonder if you can tell us whether that has been developed at all and raised with the many cities around the world who have now signed up to the age-friendly cities agenda.
Okay, so this is time for confessions. I've done a lot of work on climate change and health, and I never really looked at the problem of climate change and aging other than the problem of heat waves. So I had to do a lot of reading, and I rang my colleagues in Geneva, and they told me, well, fantastic that you're coming to this conference. I'm part of the of the organizing committee. That was John Beard, but he couldn't make it. So he sent me these documents that, in truth, I didn't know about. All this network of age-friendly cities, which I found fascinating. I'm surprised that it's not a larger network. I believe it's a very tiny network. And when looking through the documents, I came across that those points that cities should be focusing in order to be more age-friendly. But there was no link for me to climate or to environment. So this was my ideas. So that's why I said I believe that we need to start looking at these issues from a climate perspective. That is missing.
Gloria?
There actually are several of us here who have been involved in the age-friendly project. We started with Alex Kalachi.
Okay.
We have our colleague from Ireland, Rob Bond, and were you involved in the UK one?
No, I haven't been there.
Okay. And Canada actually had 4 cities that were part of the original round and have been involved in the development of age-friendly guidelines for rural and remote, and the northern in particular, rural and remote. And in British Columbia here, we are now moving forward on a new initiative that is looking at aging in a foreign land, which is the next iteration of Alex Kalachi's legacy.
I'm Elaine Kress from the University of Georgia, and I'm an exercise physiologist, so I was particularly interested in your inclusion of the problem of physical inactivity. And I've been kind of watching the data from Florida. Louisiana didn't have very good data, but who dies and the mortality in these catastrophes, and what level of fitness someone has to have in order to survive. Some, obviously, every level of fitness dies, but in others, it's, if you have the physical capacity to survive either the heat wave or the disastrous tornadoes or whatever, to get out of the floods. So I would be interested in, even if we have unevenness in the states between like Louisiana and Florida. Florida's got much better surveillance. But if even the countries are looking at anything with respect to mortality and the health of an individual or the fitness level of individuals with respect to the various like heat wave, healthier people will survive the heat wave.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that exists. I'm not aware specifically of an example. What I do take from what you're telling me, though, is a concern, and it's when we saw what is happening with NCDs, we're looking at a globalization of not very good lifestyles. So what we're observing in the case of the US now, it's possible that this is going to start happening in developing countries where the infrastructures are not as good in order to cope with disasters. So it is very worrisome. We need to develop good practices that we export them, because the practices that we're exporting from rich countries to poor countries at the moment are not the best. The problem of lack of physical activity and obesity, for example, is something that you go to Latin America. If people that went in the 60s and they go back today, they start seeing changes in the population. In Asia, in wherever you go. So it is a worry.
My name is Alice Belly. I'm from the Life Institute at Ryerson University in Toronto, and I'm interested in housing, the housing situation for the elderly. As you may or may not know, it's very difficult to find housing in either Canada or the United States for the aging. You have to wait years to get onto waiting lists to get into some of these senior communities. So I'm wondering if there are any other countries in the world that have handled this problem better than we seem to be doing in North America?
Well, that's a very important question, and very often you hear that the social capital in some developing countries is better from the point of view of looking after others. All the issue of solidarity is very strong. Looking after elders, very strong. This is not guaranteed, and this is a concern because with development also comes the abandonment of some good practices, and it's worrisome that some of these good practices, some of this social capital that we have in developing countries could be lost because people are more busy, people are working longer hours, and also as the elder population has the means to live on their own, they live alone or they go to nursing homes, etc. This has not been a trend in developing countries, but it's something that could happen. And I think that the opposite should come to developed countries. That culture of looking after each other, of looking after your family, of looking after your parents. How can we import that now rather than also exporting some things?
My name is Christina Kai from the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, and I relate to food security. We know that the globe is getting warmer. The drier areas are getting drier. So this is going to have a stress in agriculture problems, right? So I was wondering what the World Health Organization are doing are addressing to attack this problem, especially if we're going to have more malnutrition issues because of that. So I would like you to comment.
Well, these issues are being addressed by the Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, and also by the World Food Programme. And of course, WHO is very concerned. IPAHO, for example, has an alliance for health and nutrition, so that is looking at this problem in an integrated way. So looking at all the drivers, not just climate change. Climate change is just one of the drivers for what is happening to food and nutrition. It is perhaps the most worrisome problem for the future. Heat waves are a punctual problem. They happen and they go. But food insecurity is something that, if it comes, it tends to stay for a very long time and affect a very large number of people. So I would say that water scarcity and food insecurity, and there's, of course, a relation between those two, are likely to be the most serious problems we will face with impacts on health in future.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Peter Stevenson. Pardon the terrible chest cold. I think I can get this out. I'm the director of the School of Environmental Studies at the University of Victoria. and a research fellow at the Center on Aging there. In addressing heat waves globally, besides the elevated temperature, their duration appears to be lengthening. And when you talked about the difficulty of translating warning systems from the developed world, particularly post-2003 Europe, to the rest of the world, one of the other issues is the sustainability of that. It's not sustainable technologically here, let alone elsewhere, for the simple reason that the energy drawdown increases CO2 production and greenhouse gas production more than virtually anything else. And so we need not only an alternative to take elsewhere, but an alternative here. And I'd like your comment on that.
Thanks.
No, I guess that was it.
It was a comment.
Yeah. And just if you have anything additional to that.
No, really. It is a problem if, let me try to think, in developing countries or in a wealthy country, I believe that the system, and if you have someone that comes here from the Met side, they can tell me, the system to predict the heat wave is rather simple once it's in place. What is not so simple, and perhaps that's the part that is most sustainable, what is not so simple and perhaps less sustainable is the part that says, how are we going to do? Because you may have a plan, and if you have a plan for something that happens every third month, you implemented the plan regularly. When you have a plan for something that doesn't happen very often, things start to get loose and relaxed, and when the time comes, you may implement it very well the first time, but there's a funding needed to keep it ongoing, etc. So I do understand the difficulties for both developed and developing countries in maintaining such a plan in place.
Hi, I'm Sandra Phoenix. I work at the European Centre for the Environment and Human Health in the UK. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Thanks, that's better. Just one thing that I noted, and this is a comment more than a question, was you focus very much on the threats of the natural environment to human health. And there's a group of us in our centre who are very much interested in the opportunities that the environment can allow us with regards to human health. There's lots of evidence suggesting we're becoming more and more disengaged from the natural environment, and you're seeing now these initiatives to use green spaces, what's been coined the blue gym, green gym, to initiate physical activity in the outdoors. And I think that has so many benefits, the sustainable healthcare systems that you mentioned, raising awareness. I think the more that people enjoy being in the outdoor environment, the more they're likely to try and look after it. So I just, not necessarily a question, but just wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah. No, but what comes out as important to me is that that value of appreciating not just green spaces, but appreciating Mother Earth or Pachamama is something that gets lost. And I don't know whether it's a value that will come back to us, as is happening now in Latin America. There's sort of like a revival of this protection of the Mother Earth, particularly in Andean countries. And if you look at what is happening in some of these countries, you're going to find it very interesting. The loss of the protection of Mother Earth, or changes in the constitution to make sure that we take from the earth what we need and not more. These are important political changes. Will it grow more and make it, will it grow to be something that is really doable and sustainable and that we all accept? The change on our consumption and patterns, the production patterns, could we change so quickly? But I don't know, the more removed you are from that, if you're living in a city and the world is becoming a very large city, the harder it is to see the importance of that. So when we look at a city, as you were saying, well, we think of at least having a green space, a forest or something nearby. But we need a lot more than that as well.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
This isn't a question, but I just thought I should add the fact about what Dr. Gutman mentioned about the WHO's age-friendly cities, which you touched on. And I think that's really important. I'm with CARP, I'm Jack Marn, and we are the new vision of aging, voice of aging, maturing Canadians. We have a big following, a big association, about 350,000 strong in Canada, about 4,000 in my chapter, which is out in White Rock, Surrey, Fraser Valley, etc. And one of the things that you also touched on with the age-friendly cities is that, but probably didn't elaborate on because you're talking in a global sense, which I really appreciate the information on. But the thing is that you did mention about partnerships and volunteerism, etc., which is all to support your concerns and all our concerns. And I think the age-friendly cities has been kind of overlooked somewhat because I think Surrey, I'm not mistaken, Gloria, isn't Surrey one of the designated cities? And they're part of our CARP chapter. And we work in partnership with them because we know from what I call the grassroots local level, there are all these concerns. Everything from housing, which somebody mentioned, everything from food concerns in terms of malnutrition, and all the concerns that a lot of seniors have. And I hate to use the word seniors because we try to avoid that in CARP because we don't want to stereotype that particular group. We're saying any maturing Canadian, I don't care whether they're 40 or up, should be concerned about these issues. So therefore, the way we can get involved is by being a partnership volunteer group that supports, and right now we have chosen, in our chapter, we have chosen the age-friendly city concept because it's such a massive complexity of concerns, and then we pick away at it. We say, look, we got to improve the transportation, we got to improve the green spaces, we got to improve the conditions, and so on. So I won't elaborate any more on that, but I think that's something that, because we have a lot of visitors that are not familiar with this part of the country, it's something that we're working on, but we do need a lot more help, a lot more volunteers, a lot more people to become actively participants.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good comment to conclude the session on. Could I ask you to show your appreciation again for Carlos Carvin? Okay, we have a coffee break. Coffee will be served in the foyer. Could you get back here for 10:30 for the first panel session? Thank you very much.